What is the true cost of security? We spend our lives in pursuit of safety, accumulating wealth, building structures, clinging to plans. We invest in insurances, in pensions, in policies, in promises. But behind every dollar saved, every contract signed, there lies a deeper cost: the quiet erosion of uncertainty, the sterilization of risk, the death of the unknown. To secure is to control, and to control is to fear. Financial security is the great illusion of modern life, a fortress we build from numbers and contracts to protect ourselves from the storm of existence. But what if the storm was never the enemy? What if, in shielding ourselves from instability, we are amputating the very limbs of growth? The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." And yet, we live in an age where wants are infinite and satisfaction is scarce. The more we gain, the more we fear to lose. So we grasp, hoard, and plan. We surround ourselves with buffers, bank accounts, safety nets, investment portfolios, all in the name of peace. But do we ever really find it? The irony is cruel. The pursuit of security births anxiety. Financial anxiety is not born from poverty alone. It is birthed in abundance, in comparison, in the desperate need to hold on to what we have and to outpace what we lack. We fear recessions not because they change our values, but because they threaten the stories we've wrapped around our worth. Martin Heidegger warned us of this. In his exploration of being and time, he speaks of Geworfenheit, thrownness, the idea that we are cast into existence without choice, exposed to a world beyond comprehension or control. Our anxiety, he claims, is not a flaw, but a fundamental condition of being. And yet, rather than face this truth, we invent mechanisms to numb it. Money becomes not a tool, but a god, a structure we offer sacrifices to, in hopes it will save us from our thrownness. But no god built from paper will shield us from the trembling of the soul. Financial security, then, is a theology, a faith that says, if I just have enough, I will be free. But the question that rarely gets asked is, enough for what? What is the end point of this chase? Retirement? A house? A number on a screen that glows with the illusion of peace? Security is never a destination. It is a moving target. The moment you believe you've arrived, the world shifts. Inflation breathes. Markets fall. Emergencies rise. And you begin again, exhausted, anxious, aging. Karl Marx called money the universal whore, the universal agent of separation. It divides man from labor, effort from reward, life from meaning. And so, in our quest to be safe, we become strangers to danger, but also to spontaneity, to vulnerability, to the sacred trembling of uncertainty. We forget that the most alive moments in life, falling in love, risking everything, walking away from the known, are the very ones that offer no financial guarantee. They cannot be insured. They defy spreadsheets. And yet, they are the moments that shape us, that wake us up. Ask yourself, Was your most transformative experience something you planned? Was it within budget? Was it secure? Or did it come like a thief? Sudden, destabilizing, beautiful. This is not a sermon against saving. It is not a rejection of prudence. It is a reckoning with proportion. When security becomes the master and not the tool, we stop living. We become accountants of the soul, calculating risks we never take, measuring futures we never meet. Consider the child who leaps from a height, not knowing if they'll land safely. They do not calculate. They trust, not in the ground, but in life itself. That trust, raw, unfiltered, is what we bury beneath layers of financial armor. And as we grow, we replace that trust with numbers. How many dreams have been deferred because they didn't make sense financially? How many artists have become accountants? How many poets have become planners? Not because they lacked the fire, but because they feared the cold. Soren Kierkegaard spoke of the sickness unto death, the despair of a life unlived, a self unloved. And in our times, perhaps that sickness has a price tag. We mortgage our youth to pay for a safe old age, forgetting that both are illusions without presence. What is the true cost of security? It may be your courage, your ability to risk the unknown, your willingness to walk without knowing the end. Security may cost you your story, replaced by a safe, generic script of retirement plans and passive income streams. But existence was never meant to be passive. You were meant to be broken open, to bleed in the name of purpose, to fall and find yourself in the rubble. And yes, to suffer, not meaninglessly, but redemptively. So perhaps financial anxiety is not a curse to eliminate, but a teacher to listen to. Signal that whispers, you are still human, still uncertain, still alive. It reminds us that even in all our planning, we are vulnerable, and that vulnerability is not weakness. It is our door to meaning. We will die. Some with wealth, some without, but none with security. So ask again, what is the true cost of security? Maybe it's the very thing you were born to risk. Money, a symbol of worth, or a mirror of fear? We hold it, chase it, count it. We build our lives around its flow and tremble at its absence. But few stop to ask, what is money, really? Not in the economic sense, not as currency, not as metal or digital figures in a ledger, but in the quiet metaphysical sense. What does money mean? At first glance, money appears to be a tool, an agreed-upon medium of exchange. But peel back the layers, and something darker stares back. Money is a symbol, yes, but it is also a mirror. And what it reflects is not just value, it reflects fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of not having control. Fear of being seen, exposed, or left behind. In our hands, money becomes a totem, a talisman we believe can guard against uncertainty. We exchange our time for it, our freedom, sometimes our integrity. We let it measure us, judge us, tell us when we've made it or when we've failed. But when did we agree that something so external should dictate something so internal? Simone Weil once wrote, all sins are attempts to fill voids, and perhaps our obsession with money is just that, a response to a deeper emptiness, a spiritual poverty masked by material hunger. Money is not the root of all evil, nor is it the savior we've made it into. It is a shadow cast by our deeper desires, desires for security, recognition, love, and power. And like all shadows, it grows longer the more we turn our backs to the light. Ask yourself, when you think of wealth, do you imagine peace or status? When you feel anxiety over finances, is it survival you fear or judgment? Are you afraid of going broke or of what that says about who you are? Because money has become the proxy for identity. How often do we hear the phrase, "What do you do?" But what we're really asking is, how much do you make? We don't just commodify services. We commodify people. We turn existence into economics. A resume becomes your worth. A salary becomes your story. And slowly, the soul atrophies beneath the weight of the market. Jean Baudrillard, the French sociologist, warned of this collapse of meaning in postmodern culture. He spoke of simulation, where symbols replace the real, and the symbol becomes more real than reality itself. Money, in his view, is the ultimate simulacrum, a thing with no essence, only exchangeability, a number that replaces experience, a value that replaces values. We no longer ask if something is good. We ask if it's profitable. We no longer wonder if we're fulfilled. We wonder if we're paid enough. Even art bends the knee. Even truth wears a price tag. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But in the age of monetized meaning, our why has been sold, packaged, advertised back to us in subscription plans and financial products. Purpose becomes a service. Joy becomes a luxury item. And the how we earn, how we hustle, how we grind, becomes the centerpiece of our existence. But money is not meaning. It's just noise, and the louder it gets, the harder it becomes to hear the quiet truths whispering beneath it. You can be rich and hollow. You can be poor and radiant. The balance in your bank account says nothing of the weight in your soul. So why do we keep confusing them? Because fear is profitable. Entire industries are built upon it. Life insurance, retirement planning, credit scores, even motivational content. They sell you peace, but only if you pay. They promise safety, but only if you subscribe. You are made to believe that without the right financial tools, you are a walking catastrophe. And slowly, without realizing it, you trade in your agency for anxiety. The system doesn't want you to feel enough. If you did, you'd stop buying. Money is the mirror, and it reflects your deepest insecurity. What if I don't matter? But that question cannot be answered with numbers. It cannot be soothed with purchases. It can only be faced directly, nakedly, in the silence of your own gaze. Because meaning is not made of digits. It is made of choices, of presence, of the way you show up in the world when no one is watching and nothing is being sold. Look around you. How many people are haunted by their wealth? How many chase six figures only to drown in 7 layers of expectation? The yachts, the cars, the clothes, these are not badges of triumph. They are often masks worn over a scream. And yes, poverty is real. Hunger is real. Systems are cruel. And inequity is carved into the bones of society. But even in scarcity, there is a line that cannot be crossed, a sacred boundary between what we have and who we are. And once we let money define us, even abundance becomes a form of captivity. So, when you look into the mirror of money, what do you see? Do you see your reflection or your prison? Do you see a symbol of your worth or the shape of your fear? You will be told that success is about accumulation, that worth is built through hustle, that value is in being seen, being paid, being envied. But there is a deeper truth. You are not what you earn. You are not what you own. You are not what you lack. You are a mystery wrapped in skin, a question still unfolding, a presence no paycheck can quantify. So the next time you feel the surge of financial anxiety, pause, not to fix, not to escape, but to listen. It is not the fear that destroys you. It is the refusal to face it. Money will not save you, but it can reveal you. And perhaps that is the only profit worth keeping. Wealth without meaning is poverty in disguise. It gleams, it glitters, it promises. But wealth, stripped of meaning, is an opulent emptiness, a silence dressed in gold. You can have everything and feel nothing. You can conquer the external world and remain a stranger in your own skin. The bank account full, the soul malnourished. This is the quiet epidemic of our time. Abundance without depth. We are not dying of lack. We are drowning in surplus. Too much, yet never enough. Always acquiring but never arriving. Surrounded by things, but haunted by the absence of why. Wealth without meaning is a hollow architecture, grand on the outside, rotting within. And yet we praise it. We worship it. We frame it as success, applaud it as victory, imitate it like gospel. But what happens when the applause fades? When the house is quiet? When the mirror stares back, asking a question your assets cannot answer? Who are you without your wealth? The philosopher Albert Camus spoke of the absurd condition of man, the tension between our longing for meaning and the silent indifference of the universe. And nowhere is that absurdity more stark than in the face of wealth devoid of purpose. You climb the ladder, only to find it's leaning against the wrong wall. You win the game, only to discover the prize is dust. And yet, this is the game we are taught to play. From the moment we are born, we are given a script. Earn more, own more, be more. Success is material. Achievement is accumulation. Status is a function of possession. But the script is a lie, and worse, it is a slow, spiritual suffocation. You can live in mansions and still feel exiled. You can be rich in things and poor in time. You can have every luxury and still long for a conversation that feels like truth. Why? Because meaning is not bought. It is built. It is not counted. It is carved. And wealth, real wealth, is measured not in assets, but in alignment. When your life aligns with your values, your time with your truth, your actions with your essence, then you are rich, even in scarcity. But when you betray those things in the name of status, comfort, or comparison, you become poor, even if the world calls you successful. The Stoics knew this. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." And how many of us crave endlessly, not out of need, but out of confusion? We consume because we do not know who we are. We accumulate because we cannot bear to sit in silence. There is a reason people fear stillness. In stillness, the facade trembles. In stillness, you begin to hear the quiet truth that your wealth has become a disguise, and behind it stands a person you've never fully met. Meaning is inconvenient. It demands questions. It interrupts comfort. It refuses to be reduced to quarterly reports or follower counts. Meaning asks, what would you die for? But wealth without meaning only asks, what can you buy next? And that, perhaps, is the cruelest poverty of all. You wake up in silk sheets and feel numb. You fly first class, but your thoughts are heavier than the plane. You post pictures of paradise, while a quiet grief echoes in your chest. You keep winning, but it no longer feels like victory. This is not just theory. It is lived reality for many. Celebrities with access to everything, ending their lives in silence. CEOs with private jets and public breakdowns. Millionaires plagued by addictions no therapist can bill for. These are not anomalies. These are warnings. Warnings that we have mistaken wealth for wholeness, and in doing so, we have severed the artery of meaning from the heart of life. The existentialist Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of Auschwitz, wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." And our society is a masterpiece of distraction. Streaming services, endless scrolling, luxury consumption. It's not pleasure. It's a mask for pain. And the deeper the pain, the louder the mask. What would it mean then to seek wealth that means something? Not just money for money's sake, but resources in service to purpose. Not just success for ego's applause, but impact that leaves a soul-shaped imprint. Not just living well, but living true. That kind of wealth does not rot. It does not ring hollow. It reverberates. Through relationships, through legacy, through the quiet joy of a life aligned. It starts with a shift from asking, how much, to why, from what can I buy, to what can I build, from what will they think of me, to what do I think of myself when no one is watching. Because that's the final test, isn't it? When no one is watching, when the markets crash, when the phone goes silent, when the trophies gather dust, what remains? If your wealth has no meaning, then what remains is poverty wearing pearls. But if your wealth was born of truth, if it was earned in service to your values, your voice, your purpose, then even in loss, you are not lost. Even in scarcity, you are not small. Because meaning cannot be stolen. It cannot depreciate. It does not fear inflation. It is yours, or it is nothing. So ask yourself, not what are you worth, in the financial sense, but what are you willing to suffer for? What are you willing to lose to stay honest? What does your wealth say about your soul? You may gain the world and lose yourself. Or you may find yourself, and in doing so, realize you were always wealthier than you knew. Wealth without meaning is poverty in disguise. But meaning, even in rags, is the beginning of true abundance. The calm in your wallet may be the storm in your soul. It feels good, doesn't it? The numbers align, the balance climbs, the debt shrinks. A moment of calm, like the quiet before sunrise. Financial control, measured, monitored, mastered. You exhale, you feel secure. But beneath that calm, a question stirs. What did it cost to feel this way? The calm in your wallet may be the storm in your soul, because sometimes the pursuit of financial order becomes an escape from inner disorder. We project our chaos outward, onto bills, budgets, investments, trying to fix on spreadsheets what's unraveling in spirit. We tame the currency, not realizing it was never the currency that needed healing. This is not an accusation. It is a recognition. A silent truth many feel, but few admit, that sometimes the most financially disciplined people are emotionally bankrupt. They have mastered the external, but abandoned the internal. They obsess over control because inside they feel utterly unmoored. Nietzsche once wrote, "We have art so that we shall not die of the truth." In our age, perhaps we have money, so we don't drown in meaninglessness. Financial planning becomes a kind of artful distraction, a way to avoid the existential void with pivot tables and projections. We replace inner inquiry with fiscal strategy. We soothe dread with digital banking apps. But the soul does not care for your net worth. It cares for your truth. And truth is messy. Truth is unstable. It cannot be forecasted or insured. It asks you to look at your real needs, not just the need for food and shelter, but for connection, for wonder, for belonging. These cannot be bought, but they can be forgotten, and often are. The philosopher Erich Fromm described two modes of being, having and being. The modern world, he warned, is obsessed with having, owning things, controlling resources, possessing security. But true fulfillment lies in being, in presence, in relationship, in becoming who you are. When you chase calm through having, through full wallets and high yields, you risk silencing the parts of you that need being. You suppress your hunger for change, your grief, your dreams. You build a fortress around your finances, but inside it, the air grows thin. Your emotional lungs collapse, but you smile because the bills are paid. The storm is not outside you, it is within. This is the paradox. Financial stability can become emotional stagnation. You stop risking. You stop wondering. You stop changing. You make decisions not from desire, but from fear. Fear of losing what you've built. And slowly, the cage becomes comfortable. The unknown becomes dangerous. The vibrant chaos of life becomes a threat to your tidy systems. You stop living. But you're secure. And that security whispers to you, don't question this. You're doing everything right. But something else whispers too, quieter, buried. This isn't what I wanted, and maybe it never was. You wanted to feel peace, yes. But peace isn't the same as numbness. Peace is alive. It breathes. It invites you into the moment. What many call peace is actually just avoidance, a quiet so thick with suppression, it starts to feel like serenity. But real calm does not come from perfect planning. It comes from truth. And truth requires discomfort. It may require leaving a job that pays well, but kills your soul. It may mean breaking a routine that no longer reflects who you are. It may demand tears, questions, nights without sleep, but it will lead you back to yourself. And that, more than any financial metric, is where peace begins. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And perhaps nothing is more socially accepted, more glorified than using money management as a way to avoid that confrontation. We idolize the stoic saver, the minimalist, the fire devotee. And yes, there is wisdom there. But even wisdom becomes a mask when it's used to hide from what's raw and unresolved. So many of us budget not from purpose, but from panic. We fear not having enough because we don't know what enough really means. And we don't know what enough means because we've never stopped to ask, enough for what? Enough to be loved? Enough to feel seen? Enough to stop being afraid? But those aren't financial questions. They're existential ones. And your soul cannot be soothed by savings alone. It needs expression. It needs grief. It needs courage. It needs to scream sometimes, to laugh in the face of uncertainty, to leap before the numbers say yes, to risk loss for the sake of love, to be human again, not just efficient. You may feel calm because your wallet is in order, but look closer. Is your marriage falling apart in the silence? Have your dreams been reduced to maybe someday? Do you find yourself longing for something you cannot name? Then that calm is a lie. It is the eye of the storm you've refused to acknowledge. And until you walk into that storm, you will never be free. Freedom isn't a number. It's a state of being. It's the courage to let your soul dictate your schedule. It's the willingness to lose what doesn't matter so you can finally hold what does. You may need to disrupt your own calm. You may need to spend on what nourishes you, even if it isn't smart. You may need to quit the secure job and walk into the unknown. You may need to sit with your sadness instead of scrolling through financial advice. You may need to feel again. Because the storm in your soul isn't your enemy. It is your signal. It is the sacred thunder that shakes you from numbness. It is the lightning that reveals the path back to yourself. The calm in your wallet is not the final goal. It is a question. Now that you have this, what will you dare to feel? What will you dare to become? Because no balance sheet can hold your soul, and no dollar can define your peace. That must be claimed in the storm. To chase money is to outrun yourself. There is a race beneath the skin of modern life. It begins in childhood, when value is first whispered into your ear, not as something you are, but something you earn. Grades, gold stars, praise, and then jobs, promotions, profit. A treadmill of transaction where the finish line always moves, always vanishes just before your fingers can grasp it. To chase money is to outrun yourself. And the tragedy is, many never stop running. You run because the world teaches you that money is not just survival, it is identity, it is validation, it is proof that you exist with purpose, not because you breathe, love, or wonder, but because you produce, because your time converts into something measurable, marketable, and slowly, silently, the soul becomes a commodity. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, warned that people become objects for others. They internalize the gaze of the world and begin to live as performances. When you chase money, you risk becoming a performance of yourself. Each step dictated by external value. Each choice filtered through cost, reward, gain. You are no longer being. You are becoming currency. And what is lost in that pursuit? You lose your stillness. You lose your enoughness. You lose the small, radiant voice within that whispers of dreams without price tags. You begin to believe that who you are is not as important as what you can offer, and so you chase. Chase the bonus. Chase the raise. Chase the lifestyle that tells everyone you made it, even if you no longer remember what making it ever meant. But no one outruns themselves forever. Eventually, the version of you that was buried for the sake of ambition begins to stir. It wakes in the quiet moments, when the house is empty, when the screen goes dark, when your hand hesitates before another mindless purchase. It asks questions that no paycheck can answer. Do you recognize yourself anymore? Did you forget what you loved before money mattered? Have you confused motion for meaning? Because chasing is not the same as arriving. And the more you chase money, the more you become estranged from the part of you that doesn't speak in currency, the part that values presence over profit, truth over optics, being over branding. We become ghosts of ourselves in pursuit of wealth. We hollow out our days in service to numbers, while wondering why joy feels like a stranger. We imagine we're building a future, but what we're really doing is exiling ourselves from the present. And it shows. It shows in the father who is always busy, the artist who never creates, the friend who hasn't answered in months, the lover who forgets to look up from the glow of their second job. These are the casualties of the chase. Not dramatic, just quietly devastating. You run for stability, but never stop to feel if you're standing on anything solid. You run for success, but forget that success without self is just a trophy in an empty room. Carl Rogers, the psychologist, spoke of the fully functioning person, someone in alignment with their true self. But chasing money often splits us in two, the self that earns and the self that waits. And as the years pass, the gap widens. Eventually, you no longer know which version is real. You are efficient, admired, perhaps even envied, but you feel dislocated in your own life. And the saddest part, the chase is endless because money doesn't end. It doesn't say enough. It doesn't embrace you when you're tired. It doesn't thank you for the years you gave up your joy. It only demands more and more and more until you collapse or wake up or disappear completely. There is a moment that comes, if you're lucky, a breaking, a pause, when you realize You are not the chase, that you have permission to stop, to ask not what money wants from you, but what you want from your life. What kind of hours make you feel human? What kind of work cracks open your chest and lets you breathe? What kind of enough would allow you to return to yourself? These are not questions money can answer. They are the questions money wants you to forget. Because if you truly remembered who you were before the chase began, then maybe, just maybe, the whole system would tremble. You are not lazy for stopping. You are not weak for wanting peace. You are not unambitious for choosing presence over performance. You are simply remembering. Remembering that to chase money is to lose track of time, and to lose time is to lose you. There are other races worth running. The race to feel deeply again. The race to reconnect with your buried self. The race to live a life so honest it could never be priced. You cannot outrun yourself forever. Eventually, you must turn. Face the you that waited. And ask forgiveness, not for failing to earn more, but for forgetting you were already whole. Let the chase end. Walk instead. Walk toward meaning, toward rest, toward the messy, uncertain beauty of a life lived in alignment. The money may follow, or it may not. But either way, you'll stop mistaking velocity for value. And finally, you'll begin to return, not to wealth, but to yourself. Is financial freedom just another prison with velvet bars? We speak of it like salvation, financial freedom. The phrase glows in headlines, drowns in hashtags, drips from the mouths of influencers selling liberation in the form of passive income and early retirement. It's framed as the peak, an escape from wage slavery, from the rat race, from the dull ache of dependence. But beneath the surface of that promise lies a haunting question. What if the freedom you chase is simply a more elegant kind of confinement? A prison dressed in choices, a cage built from abundance, a velvet-lined trap that whispers of liberty while tightening its hold with every new milestone reached. This is the paradox of postmodern freedom. You're free to own anything, but not to be anything. Because the freedom we're sold is rarely existential. It is economic. And economic freedom is still tethered to a system designed to keep you running. Financial freedom is not about being free from money. It is about being free through money. Which is to say, you're still bound, just differently. You accumulate until you can finally breathe. But by the time you reach that breath, you may have forgotten how to inhale anything but efficiency. The philosopher Michel Foucault warned of systems that don't just restrict bodies, but train minds. He spoke of disciplinary institutions that control not through chains, but through invisible norms. And in that light, financial freedom becomes just another disciplinary fantasy. You aren't told to revolt. You're told to optimize. You're not shackled with scarcity. You're seduced by options. A freedom within the system, not from it. You retire early, but still live on spreadsheets. You escape the 9 to 5, but your mind remains shackled to fear of inflation, tax strategy, market movement. You buy your time back, but can't stop measuring it. You stop working for others, but still work for the version of yourself, obsessed with control. And worse, you often lose the why. You forgot why you started. What was this freedom for? To sit alone in a house you finally paid off, wondering why peace still hasn't arrived? To wake without an alarm clock, but dread the emptiness of a day without meaning? To leave the office forever, but still check your investment portfolio like it's a heartbeat monitor? This is the velvet bar, soft, subtle, beautiful even, but it holds you still. The Stoics, particularly Epictetus, believed that freedom was internal, not circumstantial. He wrote, "Is freedom anything else than the power of living as we will?" But the problem is, most people don't know what they will. They only know what they've been told to want, and so their freedom becomes a mimicry, scripted, polished, performative. Financial freedom is supposed to be the end of fear, but more often, it just evolves it. Fear of losing what you've gained, fear of not being productive anymore, fear of irrelevance, fear that, without the chase, your days are without shape. So you fill them with side hustles, brand building, real estate webinars, biohacking routines, and endless self-optimization. But you are not free. You are simply busier in a prettier room. This is not to say wealth is wrong, nor that preparation is foolish. It's to say that if your idea of freedom is only based on how much you own, then your soul is still enslaved. Because true freedom is not a number, it is a reckoning with time, with mortality, with meaning, with the terrifying truth that no amount of money can insulate you from loss, from pain, from death. Financial freedom cannot answer the existential scream that wakes you at 3 a.m. It cannot teach you how to love without conditions. It cannot restore a relationship destroyed by years of neglect in the name of building wealth. It cannot give you purpose, though it can fund your distractions from the absence of one. You can own every minute of your day and still not live any of them. That's the hidden trap, because once the game of survival ends, you're left with yourself. And if you haven't made peace with that self, then no amount of time, money, or control will rescue you. You'll seek new prisons. You'll set new goals, raise the bar, optimize the process, find a new target to pursue under the guise of growth. But deep down, you're still trying to escape that old, echoing question: what is this all for? The Zen masters teach Mu, the practice of in asking the question, of returning not to the answer, but to the silence beneath it. Perhaps financial freedom is not something to chase, but something to examine, to dismantle, to see for what it is, a tool, not a tellus. Because freedom is not granted by digits. It is born in awareness. Awareness of who you are when no one needs anything from you, when there's nothing to prove, nothing to gain, nothing left to run from. In that space, freedom is not financial. It is existential. It is the ability to sit with yourself without needing distraction, to live each moment as its own reward, to choose presence over projection. Ask yourself, if you had every dollar you ever dreamed of, would you be free? Or would you just be wealthy and terrified? Terrified of silence, of stillness, of the weight of a day without instruction? Financial freedom is real, but it is not the end. It is a door, and the room beyond that door is empty until you fill it. Not with investments, not with strategies, but with a life. A life you remember living. A life that doesn't count the hours, but feels them. A life that doesn't confuse liberation with luxury. A life that doesn't worship velvet bars, but breaks them and walks out into the wilderness of the unmeasured self. That is where freedom begins. Debt, the modern chain that sings of progress. We sign the papers. We nod our heads. We step forward, believing we are ascending. A new home, an education, a car, a dream, and behind each is the silent signature of bondage, debt. It wears a smile, speaks the language of empowerment, and walks beside us like a friend. But debt is not a companion. Debt is a chain forged not with metal, but with promises. And yet it sings, not like a lament, but like a hymn of advancement, growth, responsibility, progress. This is how the modern world disguises its slavery, with choice. You are free to borrow, free to spend, free to reach for what was once unreachable. And when you do, the chain tightens, softly, quietly, lovingly. But it tightens. We no longer shackle bodies. We shackle futures. We bind time itself. You will repay with labor, with hours, with your breath. And the tragedy, we celebrate it. We call it adulthood. We call it ambition. We call it getting ahead. But ahead of what? Or who? Behind the smiles of first-time homeowners and newly minted graduates lies a deeper truth. They do not own what they've acquired. What they've acquired owns them. We have engineered a system where the price of participation is self-collateralization. You are the asset, your energy, your health, your years. Debt is the contract that converts you into a number, predictable, profitable, perpetual. Fyodor Dostoevsky, who understood imprisonment in both metaphor and reality, wrote, "The second half of a man's life is made up of nothing but the habits he has acquired during the first half." And today, the first habit we acquire is borrowing. We borrow against time we do not yet possess. We pledge it without question. And when the bill comes due, we find we have nothing left to give but ourselves. And yet we march forward. Student loans for jobs that no longer exist. Mortgages for homes that feel like tombs. Credit cards for experiences we were too numb to enjoy. And all of it in the name of progress. But what is progress if it costs your peace? What is growth if it demands your silence? We are taught to fear being behind in career, behind in wealth, behind in status. And debt becomes the shortcut, the bridge between lack and illusion. But that bridge is made of bones, yours and mine. And when it cracks, when the system trembles, we are told it is our fault. We mismanaged, we overreached, we failed. But who designed the system? Who normalized the idea that education must come with a lifelong financial wound, that a place to live must cost 30 years of your breath? That to participate in society, you must first indenture yourself to it. It is not just unjust, it is inhuman, but it is profitable. Because a person in debt is a person who cannot afford to stop. They cannot question. They cannot dream. They cannot rebel. They are busy, busy repaying, busy apologizing for being born into a world with a price tag on dignity. This is the new form of control, not through force, but through fear. You won't speak out. Your job pays your loans. You won't take risks. Your bills demand consistency. You won't rest, because debt never sleeps. Michel Foucault called this the internalization of power, when the structures of control no longer need to be enforced externally, because they've been accepted within. The debtor becomes his own jailer. Every swipe of the card, every loan approval, every refinance is a deeper submission to the script. But you're told it's normal. You're told it's your ticket to the life you want. And maybe it is, if the life you want was written by someone else. The truth is, debt doesn't just take your money, it takes your imagination. It narrows your possibilities. It turns "what if" into "I can't." You stop asking what you love and start asking what pays. You stop asking where you belong and start asking what's affordable. You stop being human and start being a financial entity. Debt reduces your story into an amortization schedule. And even when you make it, even when you pay it off, what remains? A body that learned to flinch, a mind that learned to compromise, a soul that learned to wait. This is the deeper wound of debt, not just the cost, but the conditioning. You can become free on paper and still not know how to breathe. And yet, within this bleakness, there is an ember, a quiet, stubborn truth. You are not your balance. You are not your credit score. You are not the number of years left on your loan. You are not the shame the system placed on your shoulders for playing the only game available. You are a human being, unfinished, untamed, unpriced, and your worth was never meant to be mortgaged. So what now? Maybe it begins not with escape, but with awareness. To see the chain for what it is, even if you cannot yet break it. To stop calling it empowerment and start naming it dependency. To stop worshiping the system that feeds on your future and to ask, what does it mean to live well, not later, but now? Not recklessly, but truthfully. Not in denial, but in defiance. Because there is a quiet revolution in rejecting the narrative, in refusing to let debt define your dignity, in reclaiming your days, not after everything is paid off, but in the midst of the wait. To create, to connect, to speak, to resist, even while chained, because chains can sing. But you don't have to listen. Barter, the illusion of fair exchange. Before there was money, there was barter, trade in its rawest form. An apple for a loaf, a pelt for a blade. The image feels noble, simple, even. Human hands meeting in agreement. No middlemen, no banks, no interest rates, just value for value. But even in its most primitive state, exchange was never fair. It was never equal. Because beneath every transaction, hidden and humming, was something deeper than objects. Power. And power, whether draped in fur or dressed in digital code, has never traded equally. Barter, then, is not pure. It is performance, an illusion of balance, hiding the imbalance of need. Who needs the bread more? Who has the leverage? Who can afford to walk away? Barter, like every system of exchange, is built not on the item, but on the desperation behind it. In the shadows of every deal, someone is bending further than they say. This illusion persists even now. We no longer swap goats for grain, but we barter time for security, freedom for predictability, creativity for credibility, peace for productivity. We trade hours of our lives for salaries, benefits, access, and we're told it's fair. But is it? If the worker trades 40 years for a retirement he may never enjoy, is that a fair exchange? If the artist gives up their voice to please the market, is that equilibrium? If the parent sacrifices presents for a paycheck, is that balance? Jean Baudrillard, in his critique of capitalist culture, argued that in modernity, we no longer exchange things. We exchange signs, symbols of value, illusions of worth. We buy the idea of luxury, the appearance of status, and this too is a form of barter. We offer authenticity for approval. We trade identity for belonging. We sell discomfort as growth and fatigue as ambition. And every deal we make is dressed in the myth of equality. But behind the suit, behind the smile, behind the handshake, someone always gives more than they wanted. Barter survives not because it's fair, but because it feels fair. It disguises power. It softens desperation. It paints hierarchy as harmony. And we fall for it again and again because we've been trained not to ask the deeper question, what am I actually giving away? You may think you're trading 1 hour of labor for 1 hour's wage, but if that hour cost your health, your joy, your relationships, your voice, then what was truly exchanged? And what did you lose that cannot be returned? The philosopher Theodor Adorno warned that under late capitalism, all life becomes exchange, that even our emotions, our identities, our rebellions are sold back to us. We become consumers of ourselves, performing value, packaging authenticity, monetizing our own existence. You start to see it everywhere. In the influencer, who barters their privacy for influence. In the student who trades their curiosity for credentials. In the worker who clocks in daily, bartering dreams for deliverables. We tell ourselves it's fair, that this is how the world works, that everyone gives something. But the silence under the system tells a darker truth. Some people trade necessity. Others trade convenience. Some barter their only options. Others barter for more options. The illusion of fair exchange makes it easy to ignore exploitation, because when both sides agree, we call it choice, even if one side had no real freedom at all. So, how do we live inside this machinery? How do we survive a world where every gift becomes a transaction, every gesture a strategy? Maybe it starts with noticing. Noticing when your yes is really a surrender. When your trade is a cry for safety, not opportunity. When your work is no longer an offering, but an apology. You cannot opt out of exchange, but you can begin to see it, to interrogate it, to slow it down, to ask, is this worth it? And what do I become if I keep trading like this? Because barter does more than shift goods. It shapes identity. You become what you repeatedly offer. And over time, if you always trade silence for security, you forget how to speak. If you always exchange honesty for approval, you forget what truth even feels like. There is a point, silent and slow, where you stop bartering things and begin bartering yourself. And when that moment arrives, the illusion of fairness shatters. You see that what you've been trading is not time or effort or skills, but pieces of your soul. And no loaf of bread, no paycheck, no applause can ever balance that scale. So what then? Maybe, just maybe, we begin again. Not by escaping the world of exchange, but by rewriting the terms, by saying no when the price is your integrity, by choosing the kind of labor that doesn't ask you to vanish, by offering without selling, by giving without losing yourself. Not all barter is a prison, but all barter requires awareness. And that is where fairness begins, not in the transaction, but in the consciousness behind it. Because only when you know what you're truly trading can you finally choose to keep what matters most. You are not your credit score, a number, 3 digits, silent, clinical, floating above your existence like a digital halo or a curse. Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, gatekeepers of your perceived worth. You are not your credit score, but the world acts like you are. It decides where you live, what you drive, if you qualify, if you're trusted, if you're safe. And the cruelest part? It doesn't measure your integrity. It doesn't see your resilience. It doesn't know the nights you went without so your children could eat. It doesn't remember the hospital bills, the layoff, the failed business that nearly broke you but made you real. It only sees payment history, debt-to-income ratio, credit utilization, algorithmic approval, a soulless quantification of survival. The philosopher Martin Buber spoke of 2 ways of being, I-it and I-thou. In I-it, we reduce each other to objects, measurable, usable, disposable. In I-thou, we meet as souls, unrepeatable, sacred, whole. The credit system is it made absolute, and it does not see you. It sees data, risk, likelihood. It turns your story into statistics, your life into leverage. But your value cannot be borrowed. Your worth cannot be financed. And yet, millions believe otherwise. Not consciously, but in the quiet spaces, in the shame that follows a loan rejection, in the panic before a credit pull, in the deep-seated belief that a low score equals a low self. Because that's the unspoken gospel of modern finance. You are only as trustworthy as your score. And so we comply. We optimize. We obey. We build credit like we're building identity. We check apps obsessively. We fear the dip, the inquiry, the mark that makes us less eligible, less respectable, less human. And behind all this calculation, something sacred is lost. We forget that life is not linear, that some of the wisest, kindest, most courageous people you will ever meet have terrible credit because they chose risk, because they fell, because they got back up, because they prioritized people over payments, because they said yes to survival instead of bankruptcy-proof perfection. But there is no score for grace, no metric for meaning, no algorithm that measures the soul's weathering. Instead, we are left with judgment without context. And what does that judgment do? It divides. It punishes the poor. It stigmatizes the struggler. It rewards those who play the game, not necessarily with honesty, but with strategy. You can manipulate your score, after all. Keep a small balance. Open another card. Make the minimum payment. It doesn't matter who you are, only how well you manage optics. The truth is ugly. The system does not care if you are good, only if you are compliant. And in that compliance, something deeper dies. You stop taking risks that matter. You avoid starting the business, changing careers, helping a friend, because what if it hurts your score? You tether your future to fear. You internalize a false gospel. But you are not your credit score. You are the nights you endured without collapsing. You are the forgiveness you offered even when your heart was broken. You are the quiet acts of courage no database can quantify. And yet, it is hard to remember this because the world insists otherwise. And it does more than insist. It rewards. A high score means access, low interest rates, nice apartments, respect in invisible spaces. And so we aspire, not for the sake of freedom, but for smoother transactions. But if your freedom depends on approval from a system that does not know you, is it truly freedom? If your self-worth trembles at the click of a credit inquiry, are you really standing on your own? This is the violence of quantification, not physical, but spiritual. A slow erosion of the belief that you are more than numbers. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us of ressentiment, the internalized hatred of powerlessness. The oppressed begin to see themselves through the eyes of their oppressors. And so we see ourselves as credit scores, as liabilities, as debtors defined not by dreams, but by digits. But you are not a loan application. You are a miracle, flawed, resilient, unreducible, and the only score that matters is the one you give yourself when no one is watching. When the bills pile up, when the system fails, when you still choose love, still choose honesty, still choose to rise again. So, what now? Live wisely. Yes. Pay what you can. Honor your commitments. But do not confuse your commitments with your identity. Let the score be what it is. A tool. A reflection, not of who you are, but of how the system sees you. And then reject that reflection. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because systems change, scores fade. But the self you fight for, behind the debt, behind the judgment, behind the silence, that self remains, not defined by digits, but by dignity. Poverty reveals more truth than abundance can conceal. There is a silence inside poverty that few hear. A stillness where all illusions break, where pretenses burn away, where the bare structure of life stands exposed. It is not glamorous, it is not romantic, but it is honest. Poverty is the collapse of distraction. No lavish veneer, no cushion of convenience, no mask of control. What's left is raw. What do you fear when the rent is due and the fridge is empty? What do you believe when you're forgotten by systems built to ignore you? Who do you become when no one is buying what you have to sell? Poverty is not simply the absence of money. It is the stripping away of illusions. In abundance, we are protected by layers: luxury, excess, choice. They shield us from asking the deeper questions. What matters? Who am I when no one's watching? What does it mean to survive? But in poverty, the questions are not optional. They arrive like hunger, daily, unrelenting, unmerciful. They expose the fragility of the self we built through consumption. Because when you can't consume, you must confront. Confront the self you abandoned in the name of productivity. Confront the stories you were sold about success and value. Confront the aching truth that your worth was never meant to be tied to what you own. In this way, poverty becomes a mirror, reflecting not just the systems that fail us, but the identities we've constructed to feel safe within them. And that mirror does not lie. The philosopher Simone Weil, in her Reflections on Affliction, wrote, "Affliction is a marvel of divine technique. It is a disfiguration of the soul that can make it ready for truth." Poverty, in this sense, is not noble, but it is revealing. Because when there is nothing left to perform for, you learn what is real. The friend who stays even when you can offer nothing. The resilience that rises from somewhere you didn't know existed. The small acts of beauty, shared bread, a borrowed coat, a gesture of humanity, glowing like embers in the dark. Poverty strips away comfort, yes, but also illusion. It shows you how much of your self-worth was built on mirrors, and how quickly those mirrors shatter. In contrast, abundance is often a stage, a performance of control, a denial of impermanence. You upgrade, you renovate, you invest. But beneath it all lies the silent fear. If I lose this, what am I? Wealth can hide suffering. Dress it in designer. Drown it in vacations. Mute it with consumption. But poverty magnifies everything. Loneliness, shame, hope. It distills life into something brutal and strangely clear. You begin to see the gears of the world turning without you. You begin to understand how little empathy money requires. You begin to feel in your bones that existence has never been fair, but it has always been real. And in that reality, something sacred emerges. You discover that dignity cannot be purchased. That kindness in poverty holds more weight than generosity from comfort. That joy, when it appears, is earned, not with money, but with presence. Because in poverty, even laughter becomes rebellion. A middle finger to despair. A spark saying, I am still here. I am still human. You learn to find meaning not in what you gain, but in what you endure. Not in what you accumulate, but in what you preserve. Yourself, your truth, your will to continue. And maybe that's the cruel wisdom poverty offers. You realize you've always been more than what you could afford. That your story is not defined by square footage, or brand names, or the number in your account. That your soul, once separated from status, begins to breathe differently, slower, deeper, realer. But the world doesn't want you to know this. It fears what poverty can teach. Because if people no longer define themselves by consumption, If they no longer conflate wealth with worth, the system begins to shake. So poverty must be framed as failure, as shame, as something to hide, to escape, to never speak of. But silence is complicity. And so, poverty becomes invisible, erased from the feed, hidden from the stories of success, masked by the algorithm. Yet it remains, and those who have walked through it carry a vision others do not. They know what it means to survive without being seen. They know the price of hope when the world has nothing left to offer. They know that meaning, true meaning, often grows in the soil of suffering. And when they rise, because many do, they rise with different eyes. They rise knowing what cannot be bought. They rise refusing to mistake affluence for fulfillment. They rise remembering the taste of hunger and the value of a shared meal. They rise refusing to abandon their soul for status. So let the world keep chasing its shiny distractions. Let it decorate its abundance with applause. But know this, when everything is gone, when the silence arrives, when the mask slips, poverty will reveal a truth that wealth cannot touch. And in that truth, you may finally find what all your riches failed to buy, yourself. A rich man's silence is often bought with noise. It's quiet in the halls of wealth. Soundproofed rooms, soft carpets, muted conversations behind oak doors. The world outside buzzes, shouts, protests, begs, pleads, but inside it is still. Composed, controlled, yet that silence is not peace. It is purchase. And the price is noise. Noise pumped into the world to distract, to deflect, to drown the silence that would otherwise scream the truth. A rich man's silence is often bought with noise, not just the noise of media, markets, and machines, but the deeper noise of praise without scrutiny, of applause without intimacy, of content without substance, of headlines spinning mirrors to reflect power back at itself. Because silence, in its raw form, is dangerous. It invites reflection, and reflection invites conscience. And conscience, left unchecked, can become unbearable. So the rich buy their way out of stillness, out of questions, out of the kind of silence that would force them to feel. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. But for the powerful, it's more than discomfort, it's threat. To sit in silence is to confront the cost of your own ascent, to hear the names of those stepped on, edged out, overlooked, to realize that your abundance echoes with absence, that behind the smooth lines of your empire are the rough hands of those who built it, and so they fill the silence with charity that comes with branding, with interviews that disguise avoidance as wisdom, with curated authenticity that never risks truth. Noise becomes armor, money becomes a mute button, and the world plays along. The rich speak less, but their platforms grow larger. Their words are magnified, each utterance treated as revelation, each pause interpreted as poise. But often, it's just evasion. Because silence can be complicity. And in wealth, silence is rarely neutral. It is strategic, a calculated withdrawal, a refusal to engage, a luxury to not need to explain, defend, or confront. The poor are never allowed such silence. Their silence is read as guilt, as ignorance, as invisibility. They must speak, prove, justify, scream. But the rich, they hire spokespeople, PR firms, crisis managers. They bury truth under headlines and hashtags. They drown their own conscience under the flood of public distraction. Noise is not always chaos. Sometimes it is perfectly orchestrated, a symphony of redirection, with every note designed to keep attention away from the core. Because if you listen too long, too closely, you might hear the fractures, the hollow center beneath the luxury, the rot beneath the marble. You might hear the question no wealth can quiet. Who did I become to get here? And that is a question silence would force you to answer. So instead, the rich perform. They perform generosity. They perform relatability. They perform transparency. But performances are not confessions, and gestures are not transformation. Silence becomes their shelter, but not the sacred kind, not the silence of monks or mystics who withdraw to find truth. This silence is a retreat from responsibility, a silence that lets the world burn, so long as the estate stays cool. But the fire comes anyway, eventually, because money can muffle, but not erase. And the soul, if it survives, still hears, still knows. There is a moment in the deep quiet of night when even the richest man lies awake, when the noise stops, when the performance fades, when the deals, the headlines, the admiration collapse into darkness. And in that moment, if he's brave, he may feel it, the echo of everything he silenced, the weight of every truth he avoided, the shape of a life defined by avoidance dressed as control. He may remember the sound of need, of hunger, of grief he did not share in, of laughter he could not buy, of love that asked for something real, not something wrapped in wealth. That silence, it is sacred, it is terrifying, it is honest. But to reach it, he must stop paying for noise. He must stop consuming to avoid feeling. Stop performing to avoid being. Stop leveraging silence as a shield. And that is rare, because most would rather keep buying more things, more followers, more noise, anything but the truth that lies in stillness. So what do we do with this? We remember. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is suppression. Sometimes it is a signal of pain buried, guilt evaded, truth unspoken. We learn to hear between the lines, to see what noise is hiding, to ask what silence costs and who is paying for it. Because the rich may live in quiet, but that quiet is not free. It is paid for by others' exhaustion, others' voices, others' lives, and no amount of money makes that silence righteous. So let the silence speak. Let it haunt. Let it echo through the golden halls. Let it ask again, what are you not saying? What have you chosen not to hear? Because when the noise fades, when the walls collapse, the truth remains, and the soul, however delayed, will answer. In saving for the future, we bankrupt the present. You are told to plan, to delay gratification, to be wise, be disciplined, be prepared. You are taught that the future is the reward, the final destination after decades of effort, that your sacrifice now will bloom later, that your struggle today will one day translate into ease, peace, freedom. But what if that promised bloom never arrives? What if, in saving for the future, you quietly burn the present to ash? What if the life you are building toward is the one you are erasing with each passing day? In saving for the future, we bankrupt the present. It starts with small trades, skipping the dinner, avoiding the vacation, postponing the dream. You tell yourself, later, when it's safer, when I've earned it. But later becomes a mirage, always visible, never reachable. Time doesn't pause while you save. Moments don't freeze in anticipation of your readiness. The child you didn't play with because you had work, they grow. The partner you kept promising soon, they wait, then learn to stop. The body you denied rest and joy, it begins to forget what vitality feels like. All of it spent, not for a life lived, but for one imagined. And the imagination is powerful. It whispers, one day you'll be free. One day this will all pay off. But the philosopher Alan Watts warned us, no valid plans for the future can be made by those who have no capacity for living now. And most of us, conditioned, anxious, obedient, have forgotten how to live now. We know how to save, how to invest, how to strategize. But do we know how to exist? To be with ourselves without optimizing the moment? To spend money not out of impulse, but out of reverence for experience? To choose presence, even when it doesn't promise a return? We've replaced value with profit. Even our joys must have measurable outcomes. A night of rest must improve performance. A hobby must become a side hustle. A relationship must be worth the time. The present has become transactional, a waiting room, an investment portfolio labeled someday. But someday is a thief. It steals the warmth of sunlight on your skin while you sit indoors to grind. It takes the taste of laughter and seasons it with guilt. It turns every moment into a means to an end. And eventually, that end becomes the end. And you look back at a life budgeted so tightly it suffocated itself. We are sold futures like they are certain. But the truth is, they are not. The job may vanish. The economy may collapse. The body may falter. The people we love may slip away while we are busy earning the right to finally be with them. We are saving for a version of ourselves who may never arrive. So, we give up today the spontaneous trip, the unplanned generosity, the reckless dance, the indulgent nap, the pause in the middle of the chaos to say, this is enough. And in giving those things up, we do not just lose experiences, we lose ourselves. The self that knows how to wonder, the self that knows how to delight, the self that doesn't need a justification to feel joy. That self becomes poor, not in wealth, but in aliveness. We bankrupt the present in 1,000 invisible ways, with each suppressed desire, each delayed conversation, each instinct ignored in favor of caution. We live not lives, but projections. We become architects of imagined futures, building castles in a time that may never come. While our current house sits empty, echoing with the absence of our presence. The Buddhists call it impermanence. Everything is fleeting. Everything is already passing. To grasp is to suffer. To wait is to miss. And yet we grasp, we wait, we hoard. For what? For a number in a bank account. For a version of ourselves who will finally feel safe. For a time when we'll deserve the life we've denied ourselves. But no number will ever feel like enough if it's built on fear. No future will feel safe if the present was sacrificed to achieve it. And no self will feel worthy if it was never allowed to live as it was. This is not an anthem for recklessness. It is not a call to burn your savings or ignore your responsibilities. It is a call to recalibrate, to recognize that the present is not just a passageway. It is the only place you can ever meet yourself. It is the only place you can ever love. Laugh, break, heal, exist. Every time you say, "I'll enjoy life when," you are betting against your own mortality. You are gambling on a tomorrow that is not promised. And too often, you are doing it with a heart already tired of waiting. Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Yet we try to understand it before living it, plan it before feeling it, own it before knowing it. But life is not a spreadsheet. It is not a 5-year plan. It is not a retirement account. It is this breath, this second, this pulse in your wrist reminding you you're here, now. So spend, not foolishly, but fearlessly. Spend your time, your energy, your presence, not for returns, but for reality. Because in the end, you will not ask how much you saved. You will ask how much you gave to yourself, to others, to this fleeting, fragile present. In saving for the future, we bankrupt the present. But if we honor the present, we might just find that the future takes care of itself. Currency, the language of trust, whispered in fear. Hold a bill in your hand, paper, ink, numbers, a symbol that says, this is worth something. But what gives it worth? Not the material, not the weight, not even the gold that once backed it. It is worth something because you believe it is, because everyone else believes it is, because we've all silently agreed that this symbol has meaning. Currency is trust, codified, printed, circulated, and yet, if you look closely, you'll see the trembling beneath that trust, because currency is the language of trust, whispered in fear. Fear that it could all collapse. Fear that the value could vanish. Fear that without it, we are nothing. Trust is fragile, and when it becomes institutionalized, it also becomes volatile. One bank crash, one market dip, one rumor whispered in the right corner of the internet, and the trust evaporates. Currency is a story, and stories require belief. but belief can be broken. Nietzsche wrote, "All things are subject to interpretation." Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. Currency is not backed by truth. It is backed by collective interpretation, by ritual, by faith. And faith, when built on fear, becomes a form of submission. We are told to trust in systems, in the market, in banks, in governments. We are told to trust the dollar, the euro, the yen, not because of what they are, but because of what they promise. And what they promise is safety, stability, control. But what they demand in return is something quieter: your surrender. You surrender your bartering power, your independence, your local knowledge. You replace direct exchange with abstraction. You stop trading real things, labor, love, land, and start trading representations. And those representations are fluid. They change, they inflate, they deflate, they collapse, and so you never quite feel safe. The trust required to believe in currency is not pure. It is coerced. It is maintained through fear of what happens when that trust is broken. What happens when the banks close? When the ATMs go dark? When the app won't load and your money disappears into a glitch? The fear whispers, you are powerless. You are dependent. You are only as safe as the system is stable. Currency becomes not just a language of exchange, but a mechanism of control, a way to monitor, direct, and discipline. Because once value is centralized, those who control it control you. They decide what's acceptable, what's legitimate, what's taxed, what's criminal. You may believe you are free, but your freedom is printed on paper, stamped with someone else's rules. Michel Foucault warned us that modern power is not just repressive, it is productive. It shapes behavior, not by violence, but by normalization. Currency does just that. It shapes how we define worth, what we pursue, what we fear. It creates a world where unpaid labor is invisible, where gifts seem irrational, where love without price tags feels suspicious. Currency rewrites human relationships. A friend becomes a client. A favor becomes a transaction. A skill becomes a service. And in the process, trust becomes less personal and more institutional, less relational and more symbolic. We don't trust each other. We trust the number, the signature, the credit score, the account balance. But what does that trust cost? It costs intimacy, spontaneity, vulnerability. Because when everything has a price, nothing is truly given. And the fear that maintains this system, the fear of lack, of instability, of irrelevance, grows louder with every passing year. You save, invest, diversify, hedge, not out of joy, but out of terror. And you're told this is responsible, mature, wise. But the question remains, can you really trust something you're terrified to lose? Trust born of fear is not trust. It is dependence dressed as wisdom, and it keeps you locked in cycles, chasing more just to feel secure, hoarding digits just to sleep through the night. Meanwhile, the real currency, presence, love, connection, integrity goes undervalued. You cannot trade joy on the stock market. You cannot deposit awe into a retirement account. You cannot buy back a single missed moment with someone you love. But you try. We all try. And the system watches, smiling, printing, selling more futures that forget the present. So what then? How do we speak a new language? Not of dollars, but of dignity. Not of profit, but of presence. Not of scarcity, but of enough. We begin by seeing clearly. That currency is not the enemy, but the illusion is. The illusion that it defines you, secures you, validates you. It is a tool, not a truth. And tools must serve the hand, not bind it. So hold the bill, feel its weight, see its ghost, and remember, its value lives only in our belief and our fear. But you are not paper. You are not a number. You are a living presence, unprintable, untraded, unbought. And the real trust begins when you remember that truth. Work hard, retire broken. It begins early. Do your best. Put in the hours. Hustle now. Rest later. A mantra whispered by teachers, echoed by bosses, etched into calendars, contracts, and commutes. The promise is simple. Work hard, and one day you'll be free. One day you'll have earned your rest. But look around. How many people get there? How many truly retire whole? Not just financially solvent, but emotionally intact, physically well, spiritually at peace. Because for far too many, the truth unfolds like a cruel inversion of the promise. Work hard, retire broken, broken bodies, stiff hands, aching backs, eyes dulled by years of fluorescent light, hearts pumping in rhythms trained by urgency, cortisol, deadlines, broken minds, anxieties that never left, even when the email alerts stopped, guilt for resting, shame for slowing, a mind that only knows how to work and now doesn't know how to live, broken relationships, children now adults, distant, partners estranged by decades of parallel exhaustion, friends forgotten in the margins of packed schedules. This is what we're sold as success. Decades of labor traded for a few fragile years at the end, when your body is tired, your joy unfamiliar, your dreams postponed until they're no longer relevant. We've built a system where the reward for devotion is depletion. And yet, we're still told to be grateful, to grind, to earn your keep, to secure the bag, as if your worth is proven only in exhaustion, as if sleep, slowness, softness are luxuries to be earned, not rights of being alive. But the philosopher Herbert Marcuse warned us, the people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, hi-fi set, split-level home, kitchen equipment. We've internalized this. We've learned to locate our identity in our labor, our validation in our output. And so we don't just work hard. We become the work. We don't just do jobs. We embody roles. We become the reliable employee, the tireless leader, the always available creator. We wear our productivity like armor, not realizing it's killing us from the inside, because when your identity is built on work, stopping feels like dying. Retirement, then, becomes terrifying. Who are you if you're not busy? What do you say when there's no title attached to your name? How do you feel when no one is asking you for anything anymore? This is the hidden cost, the spiritual bankruptcy behind the savings account, the gnawing silence that follows decades of noise. You can fill a 401k and still feel empty. You can own the house and feel like a stranger in it. You can make it and realize that you never came along for the journey because you were too busy surviving to remember how to live. So many people retire not into freedom, but into confusion. They don't know how to rest. They don't know what they love. They don't know how to be in the world without performing for it. Work has become their language, and silence feels like erasure. But it didn't have to be this way. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once wrote, "The idea that the poor should have leisure has always been shocking to the rich." And that idea didn't just stay in the hands of the elite. It seeped into our own self-worth. We began to believe that leisure is suspicious, that rest must be justified, that time not spent building something is time wasted. And so we sacrifice now, every day, every hour, waiting for some distant then where we will finally give ourselves permission to be human. But then often never comes. And even when it does, we arrive with too little left, too little energy, too little curiosity, too little self. We've rehearsed exhaustion so long that joy feels like an act we forgot the lines to. But here's the truth no one wants to say. Retirement is too late. Too late to heal what work broke. Too late to raise the child who's now raising their own. Too late to fall in love with mornings. Too late to recover the years spent staring at screens instead of skies. And yet the system marches on, praising those who work until they collapse, rewarding those who delay themselves into decay, celebrating the 70-year-old who never stopped grinding like that's not a tragedy. But maybe you don't want to be celebrated. Maybe you want to be whole. And maybe that wholeness starts not with escaping work, but with questioning its meaning. Why do you work? Who do you work for? What part of you is dying in the name of future comfort? These are not easy questions. They pierce the rituals. They unsettle the stories we've built entire lives upon. But they are necessary. Because you are not a machine. You are not a productivity tool. You are not a retirement plan with legs. You are alive now. And that now matters. The ancient Greeks spoke of skol, a word for leisure that meant more than rest. It was space for the mind to wander, the soul to stretch, the self to emerge. They believed it was essential, not optional. And maybe it still is. Maybe we don't need to wait until we're broken to begin again. Maybe we don't need to delay ourselves into disappearance. Maybe we don't need to earn life. Maybe life is already offering itself, quietly, constantly, beneath the noise of our effort. So pause. Not later, now. Because if the path to freedom breaks you, then it was never freedom at all. Work hard, retire broken, or live deliberately and return to yourself while you still can. The market does not value your soul. You wake up, and the numbers are already moving. Stocks, prices, projections, predictions. The Dow is up. The Nasdaq dips. Crypto soars, then crashes. Your retirement fund blinks from a screen. your identity, measured in decimals. And quietly, inevitably, you begin to ask the question, what am I worth? Because the market answers everything except the one thing that matters. It knows your buying habits. It knows your demographics. It knows your potential for debt, your credit score, your risk profile. But it does not and cannot know your soul. The market does not value your soul. It does not care about the poem you never published, the forgiveness you gave when it wasn't deserved, the tears you hid during lunch breaks, the beauty you noticed in a dying tree, the love you carried through grief, through silence, through years no one saw. These things cannot be traded, cannot be tokenized, cannot be monetized, and so they are invisible. In a world built on valuation, the soul is a liability. It is inefficient. It slows productivity. It questions the bottom line. It weeps when it should perform. It needs time when time is billable. And so we learn to tuck it away, to silence it, to prune it into something sellable. Your sensitivity becomes a soft skill. Your creativity becomes content. Your passion becomes brand alignment. Your intuition becomes data-informed decision-making. But something is lost in translation, and what's lost is you. The philosopher Max Weber warned of this over a century ago. He called it the iron cage, a world where rationalization overtakes meaning, where efficiency and calculation replace ethics, wonder and soul, where people become functions, not beings. Today, the cage is digital. It runs on algorithms and quarterly earnings. It smiles at you from polished user interfaces and whispers, "You matter if you're valuable." And so you try to be. You hustle, you optimize, you study trends, adjust tone, track engagement. But underneath the numbers, a quiet despair blooms. Because the soul was never meant to be split for content. It was never meant to be performed for strangers. It was never meant to be captured by ROI. And yet, how else can you survive? You need money, you need work, you need visibility, and so you compromise. A little at first, then more, until you forget where the compromise ends and the identity begins. This is the cost of living in a market-driven world. You are told to monetize yourself, and then shamed when you feel hollow. But the market cannot value your soul because it does not know how to feel. It knows how to respond, how to grow, how to consume, but it cannot recognize meaning. It cannot tell the difference between healing and hype, between presence and performance. It measures attention, not authenticity, noise, not nuance, demand, not dignity. And if you're not careful, you begin to measure yourself the same way. You begin to forget that value is not the same as worth. That marketability is not the same as truth. That going viral is not the same as being seen. So what happens when your soul no longer fits the market? When you don't want to monetize your pain? When you don't want to scale your joy? When you want to sit in silence, not because it sells, but because it saves? The market has no place for you then. It moves on. Cold, efficient, indifferent, because the soul is not scalable. It is not reproducible. It cannot be automated. It grows in slowness, in mystery, in the dark, in communion, in contradiction. And none of these things make sense in a spreadsheet. So we face a choice, not once, but daily, to protect the parts of us the market will never reward, to nourish what cannot be priced, to create without counting, to love without leverage, to breathe without broadcasting. This is resistance, not loud, not grand, but quiet, sacred, steady. You turn off the metrics. You return to the page, the canvas, the earth, the body. You speak not to sell, but to speak. You remember not what they wanted, but who you are. Because you are not a product. You are a presence. And no market, no matter how vast, can define that. So, when the pressure comes, to grow, to scale, to perform, to sell, pause. Ask, at what cost? Because a profitable life can still be an empty one, and the market will never tell you when you've lost yourself. It will keep buying, even as you break. But you can choose to stop, to protect your soul from being measured, from being traded, from being drowned in noise. And in that pause, you may hear it again. Yourself, undefinable, unrepeatable, unmarketable. And finally, free. Every purchase is a prayer to an unseen God. We click, we swipe, we tap our cards with casual grace. Groceries, gadgets, subscriptions, symbols of status. Sometimes necessities, often impulses. And rarely do we pause to ask what we're really buying. But beneath every transaction, beneath every flicker of consumer confidence, is a silent ritual. Every purchase is a prayer to an unseen God. Not a God of temples or altars, not a God of scripture or chants, but a God of convenience, of comfort, of control. A God built not from myth, but from market, from algorithms, advertising, and aspiration. We don't worship consciously. We don't bow. We buy. And in buying, we believe. We believe this will fix the ache, that this will fill the gap, that this will say something true about who we are. We believe the right object can complete the sentence, I am. I am successful. Here's the car. I am worthy. Here's the ring. I am creative. Here's the limited edition notebook. I am healing. Here's the self-help subscription box. I am alive. Here's the ticket to somewhere else. We are not just buying things. We are buying stories. And those stories, repeated often enough, become theology. Consumerism is not a system. It's a faith. One where the divine is always just one purchase away. Where the sacred is wrapped in plastic. Where the ritual is the refresh of a page, the buzz of a delivery, the flick of a receipt. And like all faiths, it has its demons. Debt, despair, disconnection. We pretend we're in control. But in truth, most of us are possessed by what we possess. We arrange our spaces like shrines. Minimalist, curated, beautiful. Altars to aesthetics, proof of belonging. Proof that we are not lost, but becoming. But what are we becoming? And to whom do we offer ourselves with every transaction? Walter Benjamin once described capitalism itself as a religious structure, complete with guilt, rituals, and the absence of redemption. A religion without mercy. You can never buy enough, never be enough. There is always a newer model, a better bundle, a more you version of you that's just around the corner if you're willing to pay for it. And so we pray with our purchases. We offer sacrifice, time, labor, attention. We burn hours of life-earning paper, only to exchange that paper for moments of artificial bliss, moments that fade, leaving us emptier than before. But we keep going, because the God of consumerism never condemns. It only entices. It never says, "You are wrong." It says, "You are almost there." Just one more click. One more item in the cart. One more fix. The prayer is always the same. Let this be enough. Let this make me whole. Let this prove that I matter. And silence always follows, because nothing answers. And yet we cannot stop, because to stop is to sit with the truth that what we long for cannot be bought, that what we truly crave is presence, connection, meaning, not packaging. But we've been conditioned to fear that silence, to run from it, to mute it with newness. So we dress the void, we perfume it, we scroll past it, we subscribe it into submission. But the void does not close, it waits. The problem isn't that we buy, it's that we forget why we buy. We forget what we're trying to feel, what we're trying to replace, what we lost, and believe we can somehow repurchase. And when we forget that, we become servants, not of things, but of the need for things. We become loyal to hunger itself, addicted to anticipation, to tracking numbers and shipment dates, to the brief electric high of "it's here," followed by the hollow echo of "now what?" Every purchase is a prayer, but rarely is it answered. Because gods built from capitalism do not give. They only take. They take your clarity, your rest, your sense of enough, and they leave you wanting, always wanting. So what do? We begin by unlearning the prayer, by naming the impulse, by asking, every time our fingers hover over the "Buy Now" button, what am I really reaching for? Is it comfort, connection, control? Am I lonely? Am I afraid? Am I bored with myself? What if instead of clicking, we sat with that question, not as punishment, but as liberation? Because there is a freedom that comes when we reclaim our longing. When we say, "I don't need to buy something to be someone. I don't need to perform my existence through things. I can be here, raw, unfinished, empty, and still enough." That is not easy. It is sacred. It is countercultural. It is revolutionary. To live in a world of gods that demand consumption, and to respond with presence, that is prayer of another kind. A prayer not of purchase, but of return. Return to what you are without the packaging, without the brand, without the upgrade. Return to what was always yours, the breath, the stillness, the soul that does not need to prove itself through possession, because the only God worth praying to is the one that asks for nothing but your honesty, and that God lives in you, unseen, unbought, unbreakable. The richer we become, the more beggars we ignore within. We call it progress. We call it success. We measure it in square footage, in account balances, in the weight of our watches, and the brand stitched into our clothes. We are richer than any generation before us, and yet we are starving. Starving in ways that can't be cured with fine dining. Lonely in rooms crowded with luxury. Drowning in abundance, while 1,000 quiet needs inside us go unmet. Because for every dollar we add to our net worth, another inner voice is told to wait, to be quiet, to stay small. The richer we become, the more beggars we ignore within. They line the streets of our psyche, tattered selves, forgotten selves. The child who wanted wonder, not wealth. The artist who never asked for an audience, only truth. The lover who craved presence, not performance. But we walk past them every day, too busy, too focused, too distracted by the next upgrade, the next investment, the next version of ourselves we've been told to become. We give to the outside, but we beg from the inside. And those inner beggars grow louder until we silence them with consumption. New things, new goals, new affirmations of our value. But the need remains, unmet, unacknowledged. And here is the cruelty of it. The more we succeed, the harder it becomes to hear the truth. Because we've wrapped our lives in layers, polish, comfort, applause, and to admit emptiness beneath that would feel like betrayal. So we pretend. We smile through the numbness. We post pictures of happiness. We decorate the cage until it looks like freedom. And inside, the beggars wait. The philosopher Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile, the truths we bury because they don't fit the narrative. The more we suppress, the more they fester. And eventually, they find ways to emerge through anxiety, through sabotage, through despair disguised as success. But still, we don't listen. Because listening means stopping, and stopping means confronting. And confrontation threatens the myth that we're doing everything right, that wealth is the answer, that achievement equals wholeness. But wholeness cannot be bought. It must be remembered. And remembering requires us to turn inward, to sit with the very selves we've learned to abandon. And that is terrifying. Because when you finally sit with those inner beggars, you may hear things you don't want to hear. You've forgotten joy. You haven't touched silence in years. You traded your truth for applause. And the wealth you built will not shield you from those truths. It may, in fact, make them sharper. Because now, you have everything except yourself. So how do we return? How do we feed what's been starving for decades? We begin by noticing. Noticing the moments of sudden sadness in the middle of success. Noticing the ache after the deal is done. Noticing the quiet hollowness when there's nothing left to chase. Those moments are not failures. They are signals. Signals that someone inside is knocking, hungry, waiting, asking to be seen. And when we stop ignoring them, when we listen, something shifts. Not instantly, but slowly, painfully, honestly. We begin to revalue not what we have, but what we feel. Not what we've earned, but what we've lost. Not what we can show, but what we can finally hold. Because true wealth isn't measured by accumulation. It's measured by integration. How many pieces of yourself have you welcomed home? How many voices inside you have been invited to speak? How much of your life has been lived with you fully present in it? These are the questions the market will never ask, but your soul will. And when it does, you have a choice: to keep climbing or to descend. To descend into the self, into the forgotten, into the inner slums you paved over in your rush to build an empire. It will feel like failure. It will feel like collapse. But it is rebirth, because every beggar you welcome back is a piece of you restored. The dreamer, the mystic, the rebel, the tender one, the quiet child who once believed that life was about more than balance sheets. And as they return, you may find a different kind of richness. One that does not sparkle. One that cannot be taxed. One that doesn't impress, but liberates. The richer we become, the more beggars we ignore within, until we remember true wealth is not what you earn, but who you come home to. Is profit a virtue or a virus? It's a word we celebrate, a signal of success, a reward for intelligence, effort, vision. Profit, the sacred residue of capitalism's central prayer. More. More return, more margin, more extraction, more proof that what you're doing is working. But what is profit really? Strip away the spreadsheets, the charts, the applause. What remains is this: surplus. Something taken, processed, and sold for more than it cost. But at whose cost? Is profit a virtue or a virus? We are taught it is noble, that to profit is to grow, that success without profit is failure in disguise. But the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas warned us, there is an ethical violence in turning others into means, and profit, unchecked, often does just that. You cannot make more without taking more. More hours, more labor, more land, more attention, more of what is finite turned into something monetizable. And when the goal is always more, then enough becomes dangerous. Rest becomes laziness. Community becomes competition. Profit demands efficiency. Efficiency demands standardization. Standardization demands obedience. And suddenly, life is no longer lived. It is streamlined. The worker becomes a cost. The artist becomes content. The forest becomes a resource. The soul becomes irrelevant, because the soul cannot be scaled. It cannot be measured in KPIs. It doesn't convert, so we leave it behind. We amputate the parts of ourselves that don't serve the bottom line. The slowness, the grief, the wonder, the inefficiency of being human, all in the name of profit. A virtue, they say. But what virtue extracts without asking? What virtue grows while others shrink? What virtue leaves behind a trail of burnout, disconnection, and silence? It is a virus, one with perfect camouflage, because unlike a virus of the body, profit doesn't make you visibly sick. It makes you visibly successful. You smile, you win, you upgrade, and inside, you rot. Rot from the hours spent outside your values. Rot from the dreams deferred for the sake of strategic growth. Rot from the dissonance of knowing you've profited in a system that leaves so many behind. But you can't say it, because to question profit is to risk exile. To ask, "At what cost?" is to be called naive, ungrateful, unwise, because the world is addicted to winning, and profit is the scoreboard. But winning what? And for whom? You cannot drink your quarterly returns. You cannot embrace your net income. You cannot bury your isolation beneath the numbers that say you're thriving. The world praises what it sees, but the soul feels what it's lost. And more often than not, what we've lost in the name of profit is everything that mattered: time, trust, tenderness, truth. All of it traded for a ledger that doesn't love you back. This isn't just about corporations. It's about individuals, about the way we've internalized profit as personal morality. We ask ourselves, what have I gained? Not, what have I given? We ask, what am I earning? Not, who am I becoming? And when profit becomes our metric for goodness, we begin to see poverty as a sin. We begin to treat failure as contagion. We begin to forget that the most valuable things in life, grace, courage, empathy, do not increase in margin. They increase in meaning. So what happens when we stop worshiping profit? We slow. We listen. We begin to value process over product, presence over performance, depth over expansion. We stop asking, does this scale? And start asking, does this heal? The truth is, profit is not inherently evil. It can feed, it can build, it can sustain, but it must serve, not rule. It must be the byproduct of purpose, not the purpose itself. When profit becomes the god, people become the sacrifice, and the altar looks like a corner office, a sold-out stadium, a portfolio you can't stop checking, an inbox you can't ignore, a life you no longer recognize. So pause. Ask, is what I'm profiting from aligned with who I want to be? Am I gaining the world and losing myself? Because viruses do not announce themselves with destruction. They multiply silently, effortlessly, until the host is gone and all that's left is hunger, a hunger for more, even when you don't know why. But you can stop. You can remember that your value is not your revenue, that your goodness is not your gross, that your impact is not your income. You can measure your life not by what you've profited, but by what you've preserved. Integrity, wonder, slowness, self. And in that quiet, unprofitable space, you may find what you were chasing all along. Not more, but enough. Not growth, but ground. Because some things can't be bought, can't be sold. And when we forget that, we forget ourselves. So ask again, is profit a virtue or a virus? And listen, not with your wallet, but with your soul. Bank accounts grow. But do we? We track them obsessively. We refresh the app. We check the balance. We monitor interest, dividends, deposits. Watching the numbers climb like a scoreboard to a life well lived. More money, more options, more security, more proof that we're doing something right. But what happens when the account grows and you don't? What happens when the balance is full, but your soul feels empty? Bank accounts grow. But do we? We are trained to believe that financial growth is personal growth. That maturity is measured in net worth. That success is a number, not a transformation. And that the goal of life is not evolution, but accumulation. So we optimize. We automate. We compound. But while our savings increase, our sense of self often stays stuck. We become masters of finance and strangers to our feelings. We budget the future and neglect the present. We invest wisely, but rarely in the one thing that actually makes life worth living, who we're becoming. There is no chart for that, no app that notifies you when your soul expands, no index fund for your grief, your honesty, your depth. Growth, real growth, is unquantifiable. It happens slowly, painfully, in the moments that no one applauds. It happens when you lose what you thought you needed, when you sit in silence without trying to escape, when you speak a truth that risks your reputation. None of that shows up on a balance sheet, but those are the moments that change you. And yet, we avoid them because they don't pay, because they don't scale, because they're inefficient. So we grow the account instead. We learn to make money, but we don't learn to sit with sorrow. We learn to manage portfolios, but we don't learn how to be alone without distraction. We learn to buy experiences, but we never ask if we're actually experiencing them. The account gets bigger, but we remain trapped in the same patterns, the same fears, the same hunger for approval. You can be financially rich and emotionally bankrupt. You can own 5 properties and still not know how to feel safe in your body. You can have the resources to go anywhere and still be running from yourself. Because growth of wealth is not the same as growth of being. One expands your access. The other deepens your awareness. One buys time. The other teaches you how to use it. One lets you consume more. The other helps you need less. And in a world obsessed with more, needing less is the greater revolution. But it's a revolution that requires confrontation. Confronting the possibility that everything you've been working for might be a way to avoid what's already inside you. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard said, "The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. And losing yourself while building your fortune is the quietest loss of all. No one notices, because on the outside, everything looks perfect. You're thriving, you're growing, you're secure. But inwardly, the distance between who you are and who you were meant to be grows wider with each transaction." This isn't a call to abandon wealth. It's a call to return to balance, to remember that money can fund your life, but it cannot create it. Only you can do that. And that creation has nothing to do with your interest rate. It has everything to do with your ability to meet yourself, honestly, fully, without performance. To sit in your pain without medicating it with purchases. To rest, not as a reward, but as a right. To love without needing to be impressive. To forgive without needing to be right. This is the growth the world can't see, and yet it's the only growth that lasts. So check your account, be responsible, plan wisely. But don't confuse a growing balance with a growing self. Ask harder questions. Have I deepened my compassion? Have I learned how to be with discomfort? Have I released something I once clung to? Have I let go of someone else's definition of success? These are the metrics that matter, because when the market crashes, and it will, when the account dips, and it will, what's left is not your portfolio. What's left is your character, your capacity to adapt, to trust, to begin again. And if you've never grown in that direction, then the money was never yours to keep. It owned you. So grow the account, if you must. But don't let it be the only thing that grows. Grow the courage to say no. Grow the ability to stand still. Grow the kind of presence that can't be purchased. Because one day, the numbers will mean nothing. And all that will remain is who you've become in the process of trying to matter. Bank accounts grow. But do we? That answer is up to you. The economy is a ghost we've decided to obey. It moves through headlines. It rises, falls, crashes, recovers. A presence without form, a deity without flesh. We speak of it in reverence. The economy is doing well. The economy is suffering. We have to protect the economy. But ask someone what it is, really is, and watch their eyes shift. Watch the certainty disappear. Because the truth is, we don't know. Not fully, not clearly, not intimately. The economy is a ghost we've decided to obey. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't cry. It doesn't hold a child, bury a friend, or make art from grief. And yet it rules over us, tells us when to feel safe, when to worry, when to build, when to break. It speaks in numbers, not stories. It values growth, not grounding. It rewards extraction, not empathy. And still, we obey. We obey its invisible hand, its fluctuating moods, its algorithms that outlive the humans who write them. We bow our lives before its metrics. We shape our worth to match its movements. We trust its logic more than our longing. And perhaps most disturbingly, we protect it more fiercely than we protect each other. How many lives are sacrificed for stability? How many forests leveled in the name of development? How many workers broken under the weight of productivity? All because the economy must grow. It must be fed. It must be pleased. But at what point do we ask, who created this ghost? And why does it own us now? The philosopher John Stuart Mill once wrote that the aim of the economy should be to serve humanity, not to become humanity's master. But somewhere along the way, we reversed the roles. We began to believe that we exist for it, that we are here to move it forward, to keep it breathing, even if it chokes us in the process. We forgot that the economy is a construct, not a force of nature, not a divine command, not an absolute truth. It is a story we told ourselves about value, about exchange, about survival. And like all stories, it can be rewritten. But rewriting it requires something terrifying. Disobedience. To disobey the economy means to value rest over revenue, to choose people over profit, to say no to what is efficient when it violates what is ethical. It means slowing down when everything screams scale. It means protecting what cannot be measured. It means refusing to make life into a ledger. And that's dangerous, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens the ghost's illusion of power. Because what happens when we stop believing? What happens when we stop praying to GDP? When we stop measuring success in stock prices? When we stop sacrificing our days to the altar of market confidence? Maybe the ghost fades. Maybe we wake up. Maybe we remember that an economy is only as sacred as the lives it protects. And if it doesn't protect life, if it doesn't serve the poor, uplift the broken, celebrate the slow, defend the earth, then it is not a god. It is a parasite, a well-dressed parasite that rewards obedience and punishes imagination. But imagination is exactly what we need now. To imagine a world where the economy is no longer a ghost, but a servant, not an engine of fear, but a field of care. Where value is not defined by consumption, but by connection. Where work is not a requirement to live, but an offering of who we are. Where the wealth of a nation is not in what it owns, but in how it treats its most forgotten. That world is possible, but not if we keep obeying. Not if we keep trading our aliveness for approval. Not if we keep asking the economy for permission to rest, to create, to love. The economy doesn't care if you're happy. It doesn't cry when you grieve. It doesn't cradle you when you break. But people do. Art does. The forest does. The sky above your head, utterly indifferent to profit, does. So maybe we choose differently. Maybe we begin with a whisper, a refusal to be owned by what is not alive. Maybe we stop feeding the ghost and start feeding each other. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be quiet, sacred, daily. It can be the decision to value your mental health over productivity, to cook for a friend instead of scrolling for meaning, to give without tax incentive, to build something beautiful that doesn't scale. These are small rebellions, but they are holy, because every time we remember that the economy is a ghost, we reclaim the power to stop haunting ourselves. Bank accounts will rise, stocks will fall, systems will shift, but you are not a number. You are not a trend line. You are not a consumer. You are human, fragile, brilliant, here. And that, not the market, is the miracle. Inflation. When numbers rise but meaning sinks. A gallon of milk costs more. Your rent just jumped. The price tag on your favorite coffee feels surreal. And the headlines say the word like a warning, inflation, as if it's a storm rolling in, as if it's something external, natural, inevitable. But what inflation truly reveals, beneath the graphs, the percentages, the hand-wringing of economists, is not just economic instability. It's something more haunting, inflation. When numbers rise, but meaning sinks. We watch as the value of money changes, but we rarely stop to ask, what does it mean when value itself is a floating target? when the digits in your account grow, but what they can do shrinks. When your paycheck increases, but so does the cost of your life. When you run faster, earn more, stretch further, and still fall behind. It is not just your money that's eroding. It is your sense of trust in the system, in the future, in the very meaning of effort. You work harder, but get less. You save more, but it dissolves. You dream cautiously because reality keeps shifting beneath your feet. And in that erosion, something deeper breaks. Your relationship with value. What is a dollar worth? What is an hour worth? What is enough worth? These are not just financial questions. They are existential ones. Because when value becomes unstable, so does identity. If money is how you measure progress, what happens when the measurement breaks? You chase numbers, but the goalpost moves. You achieve, but the reward shrinks. You sacrifice, but the return is uncertain, and slowly, silently, a new kind of fatigue sets in. Not physical, but spiritual. You begin to doubt the rules you were taught. The logic of trade, of effort, of playing the game. Because the game is rigged, and inflation exposes that. It shows you that your labor is not tied to fairness, that your survival is tethered to forces you cannot see, let alone control, that even your best efforts can be devalued overnight. So you start to ask, if the system can't promise meaning, where do I find it? This is the crisis beneath the crisis. Not just that things cost more, but that the old meanings are crumbling. The meaning of work, the meaning of money, the meaning of striving. Inflation doesn't just raise prices, it deconstructs belief. You stop trusting your paycheck, then your savings, then your instincts. You begin to question the very premise of value itself. And maybe that's where truth begins. Because for too long, we've attached meaning to metrics. We've equated worth with wealth, purpose with purchasing power, success with what can be counted. But when the numbers rise and still can't hold meaning, maybe the numbers were never the point. Maybe inflation is not just an economic event. Maybe it is a revelation, a forced awakening, a rupture in the illusion, a reminder that value was never supposed to live in digits, but in depth. That meaning was never meant to be outsourced to markets, that your life was never supposed to be defined by affordability. You are not a consumer first. You are not a cost center. You are not a statistic. You are a being who feels, who creates, who gives and grieves and hopes. And none of that can be measured by the CPI. So when inflation comes, not just economically, but spiritually, what do? You stop waiting for the numbers to make you whole. You stop asking the system to validate your suffering. You stop tying your dreams to rates set in boardrooms you will never enter. And instead, you begin to anchor in what cannot be devalued. Presence, kindness, art, story, community, truth. You return to the places where meaning lives, even when money shrinks. You return to the language that the economy forgot, the language of soul, because the soul does not inflate. It does not depreciate. It does not collapse under rising interest rates. It remains quiet, waiting, unconcerned with markets. So the next time you feel the fear rise, as costs climb and certainty fades, pause. Ask not just how much something is worth. Ask why it matters. Ask who you become in the process of acquiring it. Ask what part of you is crying out to be valued in a way the world cannot quantify. Because your worth is not a line item, and your meaning is not subject to inflation. You are not your paycheck. You are not your rent. You are not your utility bill. You are the one who watches it all, feels it all, and still chooses to believe that something deeper holds. Something beyond the ghost of rising numbers. Something that cannot be printed, or taxed, or traded. Something true. Fortune smiles only after she devours. We speak of her with reverence. Fortune, Lady Luck, the muse of the market, the golden windfall, the one who turns paupers into kings and kings into myths. We chase her, beg her, build systems in her name. We gamble years of our life for her fleeting touch. The startup gone viral, the investment that triples overnight, the promotion, the inheritance, the windfall. And when she comes, we say, I earned this. I deserved this. Finally, fortune has smiled. But what we never say, what we dare not whisper, is this. Fortune smiles only after she devours. She is not kind. She is not generous. She is not just. Fortune is a predator, and her gift is not free. You may rise, but you will pay. In ways not measured in dollars, in time lost, in relationships strained, in selves abandoned, in years consumed by the fire of ambition. We pretend she is benevolent, but look closely. She smiles with blood on her teeth, because fortune doesn't create from nothing. She redistributes, and often she demands a piece of your soul in return. The philosopher Boethius once wrote of fortune's wheel, how it turns blindly, raising some, crushing others. No logic, no fairness, only motion. And still, we cling to the illusion that success equals virtue, that if we have more, we are more. But what did you give to climb the wheel? Your sleep, your family, your voice, your joy? She does not ask outright. She whispers, softly, subtly. Work a little longer. You don't have to feel that right now. There will be time for healing later, and before you know it, you are consumed, bit by bit. A devouring so slow it masquerades as growth. Fortune gives, yes, but only after she's taken. And sometimes what she takes is the very thing you needed to feel alive, because the climb doesn't end in peace. It ends in paranoia, that you'll lose it, that someone wants it, that if you stop, even for a second, the smile will vanish and the hunger will return. So you stay moving. You stay building. You stay feeding the machine that made you feel like more than you are. But who are you when she stops smiling? When the market dips, when the audience moves on, when the spotlight fades, you may find you've built an empire, but not a self. You may have bought the house, but lost the home inside of you. You may have fame, but not friendship. You may have freedom, but no idea what to do with it. Because when fortune comes, she doesn't arrive alone. She brings expectation, responsibility, and the constant hum of fear. She lifts you up, yes, but only so you can feel what it's like to fall. And fall you will, because she is not loyal. She does not love you. She does not see you. She smiles at many, but only to feed. The ancient Stoics understood this. Seneca, a man of immense wealth, wrote, "No man was ever wise by chance." He knew what fortune could do. He knew her smile was a trap, a distraction from the inner work that wealth can never replace. So how do we survive her? How do we thrive in a world where fortune reigns and devours in the same breath? We stop confusing her smile with our worth. We stop thinking that what she gives is who we are. We stop building our lives on the approval of something so unstable. And instead, we root ourselves in something deeper: character, integrity, stillness, service, truth. Because these are the things she cannot touch. She may take your job, your platform, your following, your comfort, but she cannot take the you that is grounded, the you that does not need her smile to feel seen, the you that does not confuse applause with love. So the next time she visits, the next time the numbers rise, the offer comes, the world finally says yes. Pause. Ask, what will this cost me? What part of me will she devour in exchange? And is it worth it? Not every yes is a blessing. Not every opportunity is freedom. Sometimes the open door leads straight into the furnace. And sometimes survival means walking away, even when it glitters, even when it makes no sense to anyone else. Because your soul is not a sacrifice. Your peace is not a product. Yourself is not collateral. You do not need her smile to be whole. You do not need her gifts to be enough. You only need to remember, fortune is a ghost. She can grant nothing that you do not already hold. So let her pass. And hold what's yours. The stillness, the truth, the quiet knowing that even if she never smiles again, you have not been devoured. You are still here. And that, not fortune, is the miracle. The paycheck is the pacifier of the postmodern human. It arrives every 2 weeks, every month, every cycle. Direct deposit, a notification, a momentary relief. You breathe, you calculate, you survive. And survival, we're told, is the point. That's the game. That's the rhythm. Work, earn, spend, repeat. But beneath the surface of every paycheck, behind the screen, behind the signature, behind the smile of stability, something stirs. The paycheck is the pacifier of the postmodern human. Not nourishment, not growth, not meaning, but pacification. A mechanism not just of payment, but of sedation. It quiets the questions, the longing, the ache. It keeps you obedient. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you just comfortable enough not to break, but just uncomfortable enough to never stop needing it. You don't rebel. You don't risk. You don't remember the parts of you that once wanted more than this. Because you're paid. And that payment becomes your anesthesia. You forget that your life is a flame, not a transaction. You forget that you are not a resource. You are a being. The philosopher Erich Fromm warned of this. People do not see that the solution to their problem lies in the courage to be themselves and not in the security of a paycheck. But courage is inconvenient. It doesn't pay regularly. It doesn't offer benefits. So we swallow it and accept the pacifier instead. We wake to alarms, not because we're alive, but because we're conditioned. We sit in meetings not because we believe, but because we comply. We produce not because we are passionate, but because we are afraid. Afraid to lose, afraid to disappoint, afraid to need. And so the paycheck becomes more than money. It becomes identity. It tells you who you are, what you're worth, what you've earned the right to feel. And when it's there, you're okay. Not thriving, but functioning. It's a trade we've accepted as normal. We give 40 years of our time, our energy, our ideas, our bodies, in exchange for what? Security? Maybe. Status? Sometimes. Freedom? Almost never. Because the deeper irony is this: the more you rely on the paycheck, the less free you become. You think you're earning your way out of the system, but really, you're earning your way deeper into it. The bills grow with your income. The expectations rise with your title. The lifestyle expands to match the illusion of progress. And meanwhile, the soul shrinks. Not loudly, quietly, systematically. You start asking fewer questions, taking fewer risks, dreaming smaller dreams, because the paycheck has trained you to be grateful. Grateful for the bare minimum. Grateful to survive. Grateful to stay silent. It becomes a leash disguised as reward, a bribe handed out in socially acceptable intervals. And if you're not careful, you'll call that leash your life. But deep down, you remember. You remember the fire that existed before the fear. You remember the days you spoke of purpose, not performance, of passion, not pension plans. That fire never died. It just dulled beneath the rhythm. So what do? How do you wake up in a world that tells you, be responsible, be safe, be grateful, when all you feel is caged? Maybe you start by seeing the paycheck for what it is, a tool, not a tether. It is not your identity. It is not your dignity. It is not your truth. It is a means, a bridge, a stepping stone, not a sentence. And once you see that, you can begin the slow work of remembering. Remember what you wanted before the world told you to settle. Remember what made you feel alive before you were taught to be efficient. Remember who you were before you were bought. Because, yes, many of us are bought, not with wealth, not with power, but with just enough. Just enough to stay quiet. Just enough to keep producing. Just enough to not ask why. But there is a point, a breaking point, when the pacifier stops working. When you receive the paycheck and it no longer soothes the ache. When the bank account is full, but the heart is starving. When the office looks the same, but the air feels unbreathable. And in that moment, you face a choice. Keep sucking the pacifier, numb, safe, slowly dying. Or spit it out and speak, move, create, risk, live. This is not easy, but it is sacred, because you were not born to be pacified. You were not born to spend your best years in service of someone else's margins. You were born to be wild, to feel, to wonder, to rise, not just in income, but in self. So let the paycheck come, but let it come to you, not for you. Let it fund your becoming, not replace it. Because at the end, no one will remember your direct deposits. They will remember your fire, your risk, your truth. The you who stopped obeying and started living. So ask yourself, is the thing you're calling security just a silence you've learned to live with? And if it is, what are you willing to risk to hear your own voice again? Because the pacifier may keep you quiet, but it will never make you whole. Consumption has become our primary form of expression. We no longer say who we are. We show it through logos, through what we wear, what we drive, what we post from, what we order in. We curate, we present, we perform identity through purchases. The clothes we wear aren't just fabric, they're narrative. The books we display aren't just read, they're brand. The phone, the headphones, the coffee cup, all speaking louder than our voices ever could. We've been taught that to be is to buy. That meaning is wrapped in packaging. That personality is projected through price. And so we consume, not just for pleasure, not just for need, but to speak. Consumption has become our primary form of expression. It's the new language of the self. We don't say, I care about the earth. We buy eco-friendly packaging. We don't say, I'm deep. We buy limited edition vinyls, vintage books, minimalist lamps. We don't ask, who am I? We ask, what should I wear to look like I already know? And in doing so, we turn life into a marketplace of identity. Not inner truth, but outer signal. This is not selfhood. This is simulation. Jean Baudrillard called it hyperreality, when the symbol becomes more real than what it represents. And we live in that now. A place where the ad is more authentic than the experience, where the influencer is more human than the neighbor, where the outfit speaks before we do. We've internalized this. I shop, therefore I am. And when expression becomes consumption, our internal world gets outsourced. We no longer ask what moves us. We ask what aligns with our feed. We no longer wonder what we love. We wonder what adds to our aesthetic. Even rebellion is sold now. Even counterculture comes with a checkout cart. You can buy anti-capitalist tote bags. You can buy resistance in the form of vintage edits. You can buy vulnerability, curated through influencers crying in golden hour lighting. But the soul, the raw, unmarketable soul, that gets left behind because it's too messy, too slow, too private. It doesn't scale. It doesn't sell. And so we express ourselves through things, hoping the right combination of purchases will finally feel like us. But they never do. Because expression without reflection is just noise. And noise is profitable. It keeps us distracted. It keeps us consuming. It keeps us trying to get it right, to finally buy the thing that makes us feel seen. But the mirror is a lie. And the longer we gaze into it, the further we drift from the voice within. The voice that doesn't want to buy anything. It just wants to speak. And not through brands, not through objects, but through meaning, through pain, through contradiction, through presence. The poet David Whyte once said, "The soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed." But consumption has made witnessing obsolete. We don't need to listen. We just need to shop. And in the process, we've silenced ourselves. Not deliberately, not cruelly, just conveniently. Because to express without consuming would require us to sit still, to create, to feel, to reveal. And that's terrifying. Because what if the self underneath the purchases doesn't look like the one we've built? What if we are quieter than our style, less polished than our wardrobe, less profound than our posts? Then what? Then we begin again, with nothing but breath, and silence, and honesty. Because real expression is not consumption, it's creation. It's the poem written and never shared. The dance done alone in a room. The conversation that isn't recorded. The kindness with no witness. The question with no answer. The truth that doesn't impress. It's inconvenient, and it won't get you followers. But it might get you something far rarer, yourself. The self that isn't filtered through price points. The self that doesn't need to broadcast to exist. The self that speaks not to be seen, but because it has something to say. We have confused expression with exhibition, and in doing so, we have grown loud, but empty. But it isn't too late to unplug from the algorithm of self, to untag yourself from your own performance, to return to a language that requires no packaging, a language that says, "I am here." Not because I bought the right things, but because I was willing to stop pretending. So, let the next expression not be a purchase. Let it be a pause, a question, a truth. Because when you finally stop speaking through consumption, you might hear the voice that was always waiting beneath the noise. And that voice, it's you. Wealth is no proof you lived well. You leave behind numbers, statements, assets, a legacy portfolio, a will written in legalese, names etched into trust funds and deeds. But none of it can answer the question. Did you live, not succeed, not accumulate, not win, but truly live, with depth, with presence, with soul? Because when your body becomes dust and the world you built passes into other hands, what will they inherit? Your fortune or your emptiness? Wealth is no proof you lived well. We confuse the two constantly, as if prosperity and peace were twins, as if being rich meant being whole, as if dying with millions meant you understood life. But wealth is not wisdom, and abundance is not depth. We've crafted a society where what you own often speaks louder than how you lived. But eventually, the noise fades, and the question that remains is not, how much, but how true? How true were you to yourself? How present were you with others? How often did you say what needed to be said, not what was profitable, but what was real? Because no bank account can hold your tenderness. No estate, can preserve your inner integrity. No diversified portfolio can protect you from regret. The Stoics said that death is the great equalizer. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not what you earn, not what you buy, but what you do. And more importantly, how you do it. You can live in a mansion and be spiritually homeless. You can drive luxury cars and never reach yourself. You can fund charities and still feel like a stranger in your own heart. Because what matters isn't the wealth itself. It's whether that wealth was an extension of your values or a mask for your fear. Did you build a life of quiet desperation dressed as achievement? Did you say yes to every opportunity, but no to every part of you that craved stillness? Did you chase the applause of a world that never truly looked at you? You can be envied, admired, followed, feared, and still be utterly unknown, especially to yourself. Because wealth can insulate you from criticism, but it can also isolate you from authenticity. When you're rich, few people tell you the truth. Even fewer ask you how you feel without calculation. You become an image, a success story, a case study, and your soul learns to shrink inside the narrative others need from you. And one day, the house grows quiet, the deals are done, the world moves on, and you're left asking, did any of this mean anything? Wealth is not a villain, but it is a mirror. And if you don't look into it deeply, you risk mistaking your reflection for your worth. So, what does it mean to live well? It means saying the hard things. It means loving without agenda. It means failing on your own terms, not someone else's scale. It means building something sacred, not because it sells, but because it saves you. It means becoming the kind of person who could die broke and still leave behind a kingdom in the hearts of those they touched, because that is wealth. The ability to shape the world through presence, not property. To offer something unrepeatable. Your laugh, your silence, your gaze, your capacity to see someone without turning them into a transaction. You can't inherit that. You can't invest in that. You can only become it. And when you do, your life begins to carry a gravity that no currency can imitate. You become a force, not of capital, but of conscience, not of empire, but of essence. And that is what remains. When the money is spent, when the buildings crumble, when your name fades from the donation walls, the question left is not, what did they leave behind? But, who did they become while they were here? So look at your life, not at the numbers, but at the moments. Who did you forgive? What did you risk? When did you soften? What did you stand for when no one was watching? These are the investments that define you. Not your wealth, not your wins, but your willingness to live a life so honest, it refuses to be summarized by numbers. Because the world will try. It will write your obituary in metrics. It will say, they were worth this much. But worth was never the right word. The right word is meaning. And meaning does not scale. It does not compound. It cannot be traded or inherited. It must be lived. So live it. Now. Not after the next promotion. Not after the market turns. Not after the kids grow up. Now. Because wealth is no proof you lived well. Only the soul knows, and only the soul tells the truth.